The battlefield smelled of burning metal and dust. Human soldiers had been fighting for weeks, caught between alien fleets that crashed into Earth's orbit without warning. Villages were torn apart, skies filled with fire, and every night the ground shook as new machines descended from the stars. Among the chaos stood one human, a soldier who had not chosen this war, but was thrown into it because survival gave no other choice. His name carried little weight, yet his courage often made others look to him when fear silenced their hearts. He was searching through the ruins of an old colony outpost when he first heard the sound. It was not the shriek of bombs or the groan of collapsing walls, but a cry, a sharp, wounded voice that did not sound human. He stopped, scanning the shadows of shattered buildings, his rifle aimed at the flicker of movement. What he saw made him freeze. A figure crawled across the cracked floor, her armor broken and soaked with strange, glowing fluid. Her hair shimmered faintly blue in the dim light, and her eyes burned like molten stars. She was no ordinary enemy. She was an alien warrior. And yet, instead of attacking him, she clutched at her side, her face twisted in pain. The human soldier approached carefully, ready for a trap, but then she screamed in a voice so raw it silenced his doubts. "Take it out before it kills me!" Her words were rough but clear, each syllable carved with desperation. He looked closer and saw what she meant. A jagged shard of enemy weaponry had pierced through her armor, lodged deep near her ribs. Energy still crackled across the wound, eating away at her strength. Every breath seemed to drag her closer to death. She was a warrior, powerful and trained, but now helpless in a world not her own. The soldier knelt beside her. His instincts told him to finish her, to strike quickly and walk away before others arrived. She was an alien after all, one who might have killed countless humans. But something inside him resisted. He saw not a monster but a fighter who had been betrayed by the same war that stole his peace. And in that moment, her survival felt as urgent as his own. "Hold still," he said, his voice low but steady. She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength, her sharp nails cutting his skin as if warning him of the pain to come. Yet in her eyes was trust, fragile but real. He braced himself, then pressed against the shard. The weapon hummed as if alive, sending shocks through his fingers. The alien girl's scream echoed across the ruins, shaking his resolve, but he did not stop. The shard resisted, buried deep as if it wanted to remain. The soldier gritted his teeth, sweat dripping down his face. Every tug felt like pulling lightning from stone. The alien warrior clawed at the ground, her breath breaking into short cries, but she did not push him away. She wanted him to finish. She needed him to finish. Finally, with one brutal pull, the shard tore free. Sparks burst from it, dancing in the air before fading into silence. The alien girl collapsed against the floor, gasping as her body shivered from the release. The soldier tossed the shard aside, watching it melt into nothingness. He had expected her to strike at him the moment she could, but instead she looked up, her lips trembling as if words had failed her. For a heartbeat, the war outside vanished. It was only them, two enemies bound by pain and chance. The soldier realized he had crossed a line no command could have prepared him for. He had saved an alien warrior, and nothing about this war would ever be the same again. Smoke drifted across the broken outpost while the human tried to steady his breath. The alien warrior pressed a hand to her side where the shard had been. The glow around the wound eased, but did not fade. He could see a faint pattern under her skin, like tiny stars flickering and going dark. She stared at him with eyes that looked too bright for this ruined place. "Can you move?" he asked. "For a few steps," she said. Her voice was softer now, no longer made of pain and fire. "But if we stay, the killers will come. They can track the shard. Even dead metal leaves a trail." He helped her sit up. Her armor was cracked, across the chest and shoulder. The plates were a strange mix of metal and living fiber that twitched as if trying to seal itself. She noticed his careful hands and gave a small nod that felt like a thank you. He felt awkward, a soldier taught to fear her kind, now holding her steady like a partner. "What is your name?" he asked. She hesitated as if the word mattered. "Rye." "I am Mason," he said. "Try to lean on me." They moved through the silent corridor, past walls burned black. The lights above flickered. Their steps crunched on glass and stone. Every sound felt too loud. Mason listened for drones, for the fast slice of air that meant incoming fire. His team was days away and his radio barely worked. He had decided to save her. Now he had to live with that choice. Rye's steps were uneven, yet her eyes never stopped scanning. She pointed toward a half-collapsed door. "There is a service tunnel below. If we reach it, I can block the tracking smell." "Smell?" he asked. She touched the wound. "Your shard did more than cut. It marked me with a field that our hunters read like blood. I can flood it with cold light, but I need a minute." They squeezed through the door and dropped into a narrow maintenance shaft. It was dark and cold. Mason turned on a low lamp. The beam traced pipes and a ladder that vanished into black. Rye sank to one knee and closed her eyes. The glow under, her skin gathered at her palm. Mason watched as a slow wave of pale light spread over the wound. It looked like frost forming on glass. It ebbed and flowed until the flicker under her skin finally steadied. "It is quiet now," she said. "They will not sniff us so easily." "Who are they?" he asked. "Not my people. Hired hunters. They work for whoever paid to keep this, or burning. They want proof I died here." She looked at him. "You removed their proof." Mason tried to swallow the knot in his throat. Helping her had not saved him from the war. It had pulled him deeper. He offered her a canteen. She drank, then winced. "You could have left me," she said. "I know," he answered, "but I would hear your voice in my sleep if I did." A thin buzz cut through the tunnel. The lamp shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. Mason killed the light and pressed against the wall. Rye's fingers went to her belt and came back with a knife that curved like a moon. A drone eye drifted past the cracks above, red lens sweeping back and forth. It hummed away, but the sound returned stronger. There were more. "We have to move," Mason whispered. They climbed down the ladder into a deeper passage. Water dripped from a broken pipe. The air smelled like rust and rain. Rye's steps grew steadier. The frostlight around her wound had hardened into a thin seal. She touched the wall and frowned. "There is a power line here. If you can bring a surge, we can blind the drones for a while." Mason opened an old panel and found a junction. He had a small pulse unit in his pack, meant to fry simple electronics at close range. He set it, looked at Rye, and nodded. The pulse flashed. The tunnel shivered as every loose wire crackled with angry sparks. Above them, the drone hum snapped. Into silence they ran. The passage tilted downward and opened into a storage chamber that had partly caved in. Lockers lay on their sides. A faded flag hung from a beam. Mason forced a locker open and pulled out a weather cloak. He wrapped it around Rye's shoulders. She looked surprised, then pulled it tight. "You are strange, Mason," she said. "I get that a lot," he replied. Her lips lifted, almost a smile. "My people say the same about humans. Strange, loud, hard to kill, harder to predict." They rested for a moment. Mason checked his ammo. Rye checked the edges of her knife and the seals on her armor. She traced a symbol near the broken collar plate. It looked like a star within a circle. "What happens if your hunters find us?" he asked. She met his eyes. "Then you die for helping me. That is how they teach the next human not to try." He felt anger rise, hot and simple. "Then we make sure they fail." Rye studied him, as if weighing the truth in his voice. She nodded. "There is a relay tower east of here. If we reach it, I can call a ship that still answers to me, but I cannot do it alone." "Then we go east," he said. They stood and started moving again. The tunnel turned into a stairwell that climbed toward a cracked surface hatch. Sunlight pushed through the gaps like thin gold blades. Mason listened, heard only wind, then eased the hatch open. A ruined plain stretched to the horizon, scattered with metal bones and glassy craters. The tower Rye wanted stood like a needle, far away. Between here and there was open ground and no guarantees. Mason took a breath that tasted like ash and promise. He stepped out into the light with Rye at his side, and the war felt less like a wall and more like a path he had chosen. The ruined plain stretched in every direction, a wasteland of shattered steel and scorched earth. Mason scanned the horizon, rifle ready, while Rye leaned slightly against him, still recovering. The wind carried ash and the faint buzz of machines, far in the distance. Every sound made Mason's heart quicken. The tower stood far to the east, thin and sharp against the gray sky. It looked fragile, but it was their only hope. "We move fast," Rye whispered, her voice steady despite the wound. "The hunters do not tire. They smell fear, and they will come." Mason nodded. His boots crunched over glass shards as they started across the plain. He kept his eyes shifting between the tower and the broken ridges of metal to their left. If he were hunting them, that was where he would hide. Hours stretched like days. The sun was pale, hidden by thick clouds of dust. Rye walked with her knife in hand, her cloak drawn tight. Mason noticed how her breathing slowed, how she forced herself to stay tall. She did not want him to see her weakness, but he could feel her pain in the silence between their steps. Halfway across the plain, Rye froze. Her head tilted slightly, her eyes narrowing at the horizon. Mason followed her gaze. At first he saw nothing, just broken spires and heat haze. Then, like a shadow unfolding, a black shape glided over the wreckage. It was a hunter craft, low and silent, its wings bent at impossible angles, moving more like a living creature than a machine. The sight of it sent cold through Mason's blood. "They have found us," Rye said quietly. Mason gripped his rifle tighter. "Can we outrun it?" "No," she said, "but we can bleed its eyes." The craft slowed, hovering as it released 3 smaller drones. They dropped into the air, their red lenses flashing like angry stars. The buzzing grew louder. Mason and Rye dove behind a slab of broken metal as the first drone scanned the area. Rye pressed a finger to the ground. Strange symbols lit up under, her touch glowing faint blue. Mason watched as the light curved upward, forming a thin wall of shimmer. The drone paused, its beam sliding across the plain but missing them. "That will not hold long," Rye whispered. Her face was pale from the effort. Mason took aim. He waited until one drone swept close, its red lens locking onto a twisted beam. He pulled the trigger. The shot cracked and the drone shattered, sparks raining down. The other 2 swerved, their hum turning sharp. "Move!" Mason shouted. They sprinted from cover. The shimmer broke behind them, and the remaining drones fired. Energy beams scorched the ground, sending up fountains of glassy dust. Mason rolled behind another ruin, pulling Rye down with him. He fired again, hitting the second drone. It spiraled and crashed, but the third shot back, grazing his shoulder. He hissed in pain, teeth clenched. Rye leaped forward with a burst of speed he did not expect. Her knife, curved and glowing faintly, slashed the last drone as it closed in. The machine screeched, then exploded into fragments. She stumbled back, clutching her side. Mason caught her before she fell. The craft above circled once, then pulled higher into the clouds. It did not fire, but Mason knew it was not leaving. It was watching, calling for more. "We cannot fight them all," he said. Rye's eyes burned. "Then we do not fight them here. We keep moving. If we reach the tower, I can blind their sky." They pressed on, every step heavier now. Mason's shoulder throbbed, but he ignored it. Rye leaned on him again, her strength fading, but her resolve iron. The tower grew closer, but the hunter's shadow followed, circling above like a vulture waiting for the end. Mason glanced at her. For the first time, he realized this was not just about saving her. This was about saving himself, too. In helping her, he had found a reason to keep walking through the ruins of a dying world. And he was not going to stop. The plane grew harsher as they neared the tower. The air thickened with dust and cracks split the ground into jagged scars. Mason pulled Rye along the safest paths he could find. though safe, meant nothing under the circling craft above. Its shadow drifted across them, sometimes vanishing into clouds only to return moments later. It was a predator that enjoyed the chase. Rye stumbled once, catching herself against Mason's arm. He could feel her trembling through the cloak, her wound still sealed but far from healed. Her voice was steady, though thinner than before. "We are close, but the hunters know too. They will not let us reach it alive." Mason narrowed his eyes at the tower. What once might have been white metal was now gray, rust crawling up its sides. Lightning arced faintly around its peak, stabbing into the clouds. He could almost hear it humming, a song carried on the wind. "Your people built this?" Mason asked. Rye nodded. "Long ago, before this war turned us into enemies. It was meant to guide ships safely to orbit. Now it is all I have left." They pushed forward until the ground opened into a wide crater filled with twisted wreckage. The only way to the tower was across. Mason crouched and studied the terrain. It offered almost no cover. If the hunters struck here, they would be exposed. As if hearing his thoughts, the hum of engines deepened. The black craft descended lower, its wings folding and reshaping into something sharper. The air vibrated with its presence. "They are coming," Rye whispered. Her hand tightened on the hilt of her curved blade. "They will send their best now." Mason adjusted his rifle. "Then we stand together." The first hunter dropped from the craft, a figure clad in armor darker than night, its mask glowing, with two red eyes. It landed with a crash that sent dust spraying outward. Behind it came two more, moving like shadows pulled from the sky. Each carried weapons, shaped like jagged claws that hummed with energy. Rye drew herself taller, despite her weakness, her eyes locked on the lead hunter. "They were once my kin," she said quietly. "Now they are bound to coins and chains. There is no soul left in them." Mason glanced at her. "Then let's take away their chains." The hunters advanced. The lead one raised its weapon, pointing at Mason first as if marking him for death. Mason fired, the shot slamming into the hunter's chest plate. The impact staggered it but did not break through. The hunter hissed, a sound too sharp to be human, and charged. Mason rolled aside just as the blade struck, sparks flying from the ground. He fired again, closer this time, hitting a joint in the armor. The hunter snarled and swung, knocking the rifle from his hands. Mason ducked, grabbed a shard of metal from the ground, and drove it upward, striking the hunter's arm. The weapon slipped, falling with a heavy thud. Rye clashed with the second hunter, her curved blade ringing against the jagged claw. She moved with surprising speed, her strikes sharp and precise, but each clash sent pain through her wound. Mason could see her falter, yet she pressed on, her eyes burning with defiance. The third hunter circled, waiting for an opening. Mason lunged at it, tackling it into the dust. They rolled, fists and blades flashing. Mason's shoulder screamed, with pain, but he refused to let go. He slammed the shard into the hunter's mask. The red glow flickered, then went dark. The body stilled. Rye screamed, her blade finding the gap in her enemy's armor. The second hunter collapsed, its weapon clattering to the ground. She stumbled, clutching her side, but raised her blade again at the lead hunter. Mason retrieved his rifle and fired into the weak spot he had already marked. This time the shot punched through. The hunter staggered, then dropped to its knees before falling flat. The plane fell silent again, save for the fading hum of the craft above. It did not descend further. Instead, it circled once and pulled away into the clouds, as if leaving them for another trial. Rye's chest rose and fell sharply. She wiped her blade, her hand trembling. That was not all of them. More will come. Always more. Mason looked at the tower. It loomed closer now, maybe just an hour's walk away. His muscles burned, his shoulder throbbed, but he knew they had no choice. "Then we move before they do," he said. Rye gave a faint nod, her lips curving into the smallest of smiles. "You speak like one of us now." They began climbing out of the crater. The towers hummed louder with every step, carrying with it both danger and the faint promise of hope. The tower loomed above them now, its sides cracked but still stretching higher than any ruin around. Lightning crawled along its frame, threading into the clouds like veins of fire. The hum Mason had heard before now pulsed in his chest as though the structure itself had a heartbeat. Rye slowed as they neared the base. She touched the ground with her palm, closing her eyes. For a moment, her face softened, almost peaceful. "It still breathes," she whispered. "Even after all this time." Mason studied the doorway at the bottom of the tower. The metal hatch was half buried in rubble, scarred with burns. He brushed the dust away and tried the handle, but it didn't move. He shoved harder, his muscles straining, until finally the hatch groaned open. A rush of stale air spilled out, cold and sharp. Inside, the stairwell spiraled upward, lit by faint strips of blue light that flickered with each step. The walls were marked with symbols Mason could not read, curves and stars, etched deep as if they had been carved into the very bones of the tower. Rye's eyes lingered on them. "These are the marks of my clan," she said. "We swore to guard the skies. Before the war, before the hunters." Her voice trembled with something Mason had not heard from her before. Grief. "Then we finish what they couldn't," Mason said quietly. They climbed, step after step, until they reached a chamber midway up the tower. Machines lined the walls, most long dead. At the center stood a console, its surface glowing faintly. Mason brushed dust from the controls. He had no idea how to work it, but Rye moved forward with slow reverence, her hand hovering just above the symbols. "This is what I came for," she said. "The relay. If I can wake it, I can call the last ship that still follows my bloodline. But the hunters know this place. They will come soon." As if summoned by her words, a deep rumble shook the tower. Mason hurried to the narrow slit windows. Outside, dark shapes were gathering on the horizon. Dozens of hunters, their armor gleaming in the dying light. The black craft soared above. Them, circling closer this time. "They're already here," he said. Rye pressed her palm to the console. Blue light spread across the surface, symbols flaring to life one after another. The hum of the tower deepened, echoing in Mason's bones. Sparks leapt from the walls and the air filled with a sharp ozone scent. "Can you reach them?" Mason asked. Her eyes glowed faintly as the console responded to her touch. "Yes, but it will take time. The codes must rebuild themselves. Keep them from reaching me until it is done." Mason checked his rifle, loaded the last of his ammo, and set himself near the doorway. His heart pounded. Below, the hunters were already swarming across the plain, their red eyes flashing in the dust. The sound of their march rose like a storm. Ray's voice carried from the console, calm despite the chaos outside. "You could leave now, Mason. If you run, you might live. No one will blame you." He looked back at her, her figure lit by the glow of the console, her face pale but fierce. "Not a chance," he said. "I didn't pull that shard out of you just to let them take you now." For the first time, Rye's lips curved into a true smile. Small, weary, but real. "Then stand with me, human. Stand, and we will make them. Remember who we are." The doors shook as the first wave slammed against them. Mason braced his rifle, his eyes hard. The hunters wanted proof she had died here. Instead, they would find two enemies who refused to bow. And above it all, the tower's heartbeat grew louder, as if preparing to rise again. The tower doors buckled under the first hit. Dust fell from the ceiling as the frame groaned. Mason stood with his back to the console room, rifle raised, eyes locked on the stairwell below. His hands were steady, but his pulse hammered. Behind him, Rye knelt before the glowing console, her hands moving through the floating symbols. The air around her shimmered with heat and light. She spoke in her native tongue, whispering commands, into a system that had slept for decades. Mason didn't understand a word, but he didn't need to. He had one job: hold the line. The second impact came harder. cracking part of the hatch. He could see shadows moving just beyond it, fast, inhuman shapes. Then came the third strike and the doors exploded inward. A blur of black armor surged forward. Mason fired. The first hunter dropped with a shot through the chest. The second ducked under the beam and lunged. Mason sidestepped, slamming the butt of his rifle into its faceplate. It staggered back and he finished it with a shot to the throat joint. More followed. 3, then 5, their claws sparking against the walls. Mason backed up, using the narrow stair to slow them down. He fired, reloaded, fired again. Shells clattered at his feet. The air filled with smoke and the screech of metal on metal. One hunter reached him and swung. Mason ducked, but the blade grazed his arm. Pain flared, but he didn't stop. He slammed the trigger again and again until the hunter collapsed. Behind him, Rye spoke louder now. The console pulsed with brighter light. "The link is forming," she called out. "Another few minutes, just a few." He gritted his teeth. "Tell them to hurry." More hunters poured in. Mason dropped his last grenade down the stairwell. The blast rocked the tower, slowing the wave. But then a different sound rose. Heavy footsteps, a deeper hum. From the smoke below came something new. A larger figure, thicker armor, taller than any hunter he'd seen before. Its eyes were a deep crimson, and it carried a double-bladed weapon that pulsed with dark energy. Rye saw it too. Her voice faltered. "The executioner. They sent the last one." "What is it?" Mason asked. "A hunter who cannot fail," she said. "It does not stop. It does not speak. It ends." The executioner stepped forward, pushing aside fallen hunters like broken toys. It raised its blade and Mason felt the weight of it in his chest. He took a breath and raised his rifle, knowing it wouldn't be enough. Before the executioner could strike, Rye stood. The console flared behind her, its light wrapping around her like armor. The wound in her side glowed brighter, then steadied. She stepped forward, her knife in one hand, a strange device in the other. "You will not take this tower," she said. Her voice echoed through the chamber, stronger than before. The executioner turned toward her. Mason fired at its side to distract it, but the bullets bounced off its armor. It charged Rye through the device. It burst in midair, releasing a shockwave that slammed the executioner into the wall. Mason ran forward, slamming into its side, buying Rye a second to strike. Her blade slipped between the armor plates at the neck. The executioner roared, not a sound of pain, but of rage. It grabbed her by the throat and lifted her. Mason leapt and jammed his rifle under the joint of its arm. He pulled the trigger. Sparks flew, the grip loosened. Rye dropped, rolled, and struck again, this time deeper. The executioner staggered. Its lights flickered. Then it collapsed, shaking the floor as it hit. Rye coughed and caught her breath. Mason leaned against the wall, bleeding and exhausted. "Link?" he asked. She turned. The console now showed a circle of light, spinning, then locking into place. A single tone filled the air. "They heard me," she said. "The ship is coming." Outside, the clouds churned. The black craft began to retreat, but the war wasn't over yet. Mason looked down the stairwell. More shadows still moved below. Then, "We hold until it gets here," he said. Rye nodded. Together. And side by side they turned to face the next wave. Thunder rolled across the sky as the tower trembled. Outside, clouds twisted unnaturally, lightning arcing in long claw-like streaks. Something massive moved above them, something with purpose. Mason reloaded slowly, fingers numb, arms trembling from the last fight. His shoulder bled and the smoke in his lungs burned, but he stood tall, rifle at the ready. Rye stood beside him, her body upright now, no longer leaning on pain. The console behind her hummed with steady rhythm. The link was established. The signal had gone out. "Your people are coming?" Mason asked, glancing at her. Ray's expression was unreadable. "They heard me. The beacon is strong. They must respond." A sudden roar made them both turn to the tower window. A shadow passed, overhead, then split into 5 smaller craft. Sleek, silver, and fast, clearly not hunters. These ships moved with elegance, not menace. They're here, Rye breathed. Mason let out a sigh of relief. We might live through this after all. But Rye didn't smile. She narrowed her eyes, stepping toward the window. Something's wrong. That's not the ship I expected. What do you mean? Mason asked. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes followed the lead craft as it circled once, then suddenly fired. A single bolt of light slammed into the base of the tower, shaking the floor beneath them. Mason grabbed the wall to steady himself. That was a warning shot. No, Rye said, her voice cold. That was a message. Another shot followed. This one closer. Then a voice filled the chamber, not from the console but through the very walls of the tower. Rye Vectar of the lost lineage, you are hereby marked as rogue. Surrender the tower or be destroyed. Mason stared at her. Your own people? She didn't look at him. Not my people, my bloodline is fractured. When I refused the purge, they erased my name. Now they call me traitor. Because I chose truth over command. The voice returned. You summoned us with forbidden code. This structure will not be allowed to rise. You will not rewrite the war. Mason's chest tightened. They're not here to help. They're here to erase this place. Rye turned, fire building behind her calm eyes. They fear the truth this tower holds. It wasn't just a relay. It held the records of who started the war, who sold peace for profit, and who turned our worlds into weapons. Mason understood now. This wasn't just a beacon. It was a secret buried deep enough that entire factions wanted it dead. And Rye had just lit it up for the galaxy to see. Then we protect it, he said. She met his eyes. Even from my own kind. More shots rained down, shaking the tower. The top floors lit up with fire. One of the landing craft broke formation and dropped lower, preparing to deploy troops. Mason and Rye moved fast. They climbed to the outer ring of the tower, a narrow walkway with a clear view of the incoming ship. Mason aimed at its underbelly. You have any more of those little shockwave bombs? Rye pulled one from her belt. Just one. He nodded. Then let's make it count. The craft opened. Troopers in polished armor jumped out, jetting toward the platform. Mason fired, knocking one off balance. Another landed hard and swung a blade at him. They locked in a brief clash before Mason ducked under the blow and slammed his rifle into the trooper's visor. Rye threw the device. It struck the platform and exploded mid-air, blasting 3 enemies off the edge. Their screams vanished into the wind. The ship turned to flee, but it was too late. Sparks burst from its engine. It clipped the tower wall and spiraled into the ground. More ships hovered in the distance, uncertain. They didn't expect resistance, Mason said. They forgot what humans do when you push them too far, Rye replied. They turned back to the tower. Below, the hunters were gone. Above, the false rescuers hesitated. For the first time, the battlefield was quiet. Rye stepped toward the console again. I can send the data now, to anyone willing to listen. If even one truth survives. This war changes. Mason stood beside her, watching the sky. Then send it, let them come. We'll be waiting. And with one last command, Rye activated the final sequence. The tower, long silent, began to speak to the stars. The tower's voice rose like thunder in the sky, ancient frequencies humming through the clouds. From its peak, blue light pulsed outward in steady rings, signals traveling faster than sound, reaching satellites, fractured networks, and hidden receivers across planets and ships alike. Rye stood with her hand resting on the console, her body illuminated by the transmission glow. Mason stayed beside her, rifle slung but ready, his eyes scanning the smoke-filled sky for any sign of renewed attack. But for now, there was only silence. The console began displaying fragments, video logs, command chains, raw messages from decades past. Rye didn't need to explain. Mason could see it clearly. Deals, bribes, orders to ignite conflict. Alien and human leaders alike signing away truth in exchange for control. You were right, Mason muttered. They started the war on purpose. Rye's voice was low. The war was never about survival, it was business. Power disguised as duty, and both our sides played along. He looked at her. And you risked your life to send this? I lost everything when I refused to keep lying, she said. My command, my clan, my name, but I never lost the truth. Suddenly, the console flared red. A symbol appeared, pulsing fast. Rye's eyes narrowed. What is it? Mason asked. They've found us again, but this time it's not the hunters. It's worse. She tapped the display. A projection rose, a massive ship entering orbit above them. Unlike the elegant fighters before, this vessel was monstrous, dark, wide like a floating city wrapped in armor. Mason's stomach dropped. That thing's bigger than a colony rig. It's the Peacekeeper flagship, Rye said grimly. But it doesn't keep peace, it buries problems. The ship locked onto the tower with a blinding red beam. A voice boomed from the sky, layered and mechanical, speaking in multiple alien dialects at once. Unauthorized transmission detected, immediate erasure authorized, purge in 60 seconds. Mason stepped forward. We can't outrun that. No, Rye said. But maybe we don't have to. She spun back to the console. There's a failsafe. This tower was built for more than communication. It has a defensive core buried beneath. You're telling me this thing has teeth? She nodded. Old ones, forgotten, but with the right sequence, they might still bite. Then do it. Rye worked fast. Symbols flashed across the screen. Beneath their feet, the tower vibrated in strange rhythms. Mason felt a thud, then another. Far below, ancient panels shifted. Stone cracked. Metal groaned awake after decades of sleep. From the earth itself, massive structures began to rise. Cannons, shield emitters, launch pylons shaped like wings. The tower was no longer a broken relic. It was transforming. Defensive protocol initiated, Rye whispered. Come on, old one, wake up. The flagship above began to charge its main weapon. Red light built at its core, forming into a sphere of heat and ruin. Mason stepped beside her. Tell me this thing shoots first. We'll find out, Rye said. The console flashed white. The tower fired. A beam of energy launched upward, straight into the flagship's underbelly. The impact didn't destroy it, but it shook it. Mason saw entire sections explode outward. The ship faltered, then tried to stabilize. Before it could recover, the tower fired again. This time the beam punched through. The flagship reeled, drifting off course, smoke trailing from its hull. Sirens howled. Dropships abandoned position and scattered. The red beam charging for the tower faded. It was retreating. Mason stared in awe. We just made them run. Rye leaned forward, her strength draining again. We bought time, not peace. But now the stars know. As the tower's transmission continued to spread, ships across space would hear it. Soldiers would question orders. Civilians would ask why they suffered, and the enemies in the dark would have fewer shadows left to hide in. Mason helped Rye sit. Her eyes were heavy, but her gaze was clear. You did it, he said. We did it, she corrected. Together. Above them, the skies began to shift, not into silence, but into something new. The sky, once filled with smoke and fire, now shimmered with strange stillness. The massive flagship had vanished into the upper atmosphere, leaving only a wound in the clouds and the aftershock of fear across the plain. But it was not peace. It was silence. And Rye knew the kind of silence that came just before something worse. Mason paced along the outer ring of the tower, his rifle still in hand. Below him, the battlefield was a graveyard. Hunters broken, human bones buried, wreckage glinting in the weak sunlight. But the fight wasn't over. Not even close. Rye sat near the console, her skin pale from exhaustion, but her mind sharp as ever. She kept her hand on the interface, watching the signals echo out into the stars. The truth was out now. All of it. Command, chains, secret dealings, genetic war designs, peace treaties signed in private only to be broken in public. The real origin of the war, planted not by accident but design. Her transmission had reached neutral stations, pirate relays, rogue mercenary guilds, and worst of all, rival governments. They would all see it now, and act. Mason turned toward her. Think this truth will fix everything? Rye shook her head. Truth never fixes war, but it shifts the battlefield. She looked up at the tower's beacon, still glowing like a second sun above them. Now they have to choose, believe the lie, or face the cost of the truth. Just then the console beeped. A new signal came in, encrypted, but the coding wasn't alien. It was human. Mason stepped forward. That's military grade, Earthside. Rye ran a quick decryption. The message played, a hollow voice speaking. From deep space. You have released classified galactic intel. This is a level Omega breach. Surrender immediately. Extraction force en route. You will be detained or neutralized. Mason clenched his jaw. They're coming after me too now. They always were, Rye said softly. You saved an enemy, disobeyed orders, and revealed your own leader's crimes. You're more dangerous to them now than I ever was. He smiled bitterly. Feels like I finally earned my place. Another warning blared. This time from the towers. Long dormant lower scanners. Multiple vessels approaching from opposite sides, not hunter class, not peacekeeper. These were hybrid craft, mercenary, independent fleets. Some of them from species Mason had never seen. Rye read the incoming codes. They heard the signal, and they're not coming to destroy us. They're coming to choose sides. Good or bad? Mason asked. Rye stood slowly. That depends on what we do next. Mason helped her walk to the outer balcony. The horizon was no longer empty. Dozens of ships now dotted the edges, some approaching, some waiting. What's happening out there? He whispered. The galaxy is listening, Rye said. Some will rise, some will burn, but from this tower, they will remember who lit the match. Just then, an alert tone echoed from deep within the tower's foundation. Not from a ship, not from outside, from inside the tower. Mason looked at her sharply. What is that? Rye's face darkened. There's only one reason the tower would sound that tone. What is it? A failsafe, not just defensive, a last resort. If the transmission is intercepted and the tower is compromised, it initiates total collapse. You mean this whole place? Rye nodded slowly. It will bury the evidence, bury us, and everyone nearby. Mason ran back to the console. Can we stop it? Only from the core chamber, Rye said. And we only have minutes. Without hesitation, Mason grabbed his rifle and looked at her. Then let's stop it. Rye met his eyes. If we fail, the truth dies here. Then we don't fail. They turned together, racing down the inner staircase toward the tower's ancient heart, where one last decision would decide whether the truth lived or was buried forever. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Each stair creaked, underfoot as dust stirred and lights flickered weakly along the walls. Mason led the way with his rifle drawn, every muscle tense. Rye followed close behind, one hand on the wall for balance, the other clutching a small shard from her armor, her last weapon. They reached the core chamber. The doors were massive, sealed tight by thick rotating locks. Alien text shimmered above, them in red. Rye stepped forward and placed her palm against a glowing circle. Her hand trembled, but the door hissed and slowly opened, revealing a massive chamber lit in pale blue light. In the center stood a glowing crystal node, twisting and pulsing like a living brain. It sat inside a shell of old machinery, connected to dozens of cables and conduits. Around the walls were coffin-like pods, long abandoned, once meant for engineers or guardians of the tower. But all of that was quiet now, except for one sound. Countdown low, cold, echoing. 17 minutes until system collapse. 17 minutes until all records are purged. 17 minutes until tower disintegration. Rye's face went pale. It's real. Mason walked around the core searching for any controls. Can we stop it? Rye stepped forward to the main interface. There's a failsafe code, but it has to be entered from 2 places, simultaneously. Manual only. One of us stays here, the other goes to the upper control ring. Mason didn't hesitate. I'll take the top. Rye looked at him. It's a one-shot signal. If either side fails, the purge completes. And if the link doesn't sync perfectly, the tower burns. He met her eyes. We didn't come this far to lose it now. They split. Rye remained at the heart of the tower, typing in the first set of codes. Mason climbed, pushing past pain and smoke as alarms echoed around him. Above, small fires still burned from earlier fights. The sky beyond the tower was filled with incoming ships. Friend, foe, uncertain. But none of them could reach the truth, in time. It was now or never. He reached the upper ring. The console was damaged, cracked, but functional. He linked in. Ready? He said into the comms. Rye's voice came through, soft but steady. Begin the override on my mark. 3, 2, 1. They entered the final codes together. The tower shook. The lights dimmed, then flared white. The countdown stopped. Silence. Then, a new sound. A slow, rising hum. The core crystal calmed, its wild pulses fading into steady rhythm. The red warnings turned blue. Across the tower, systems reset. Not into shutdown, but stabilization. The purge had been stopped. Rye slumped to her knees, breathing hard. It's done. The truth survives. Mason dropped beside the upper panel, closing his eyes for a moment. Outside, dozens of new transmissions lit up the sky, signals receiving the tower's message. Ships were rerouting. Leaders were responding, some in fear, some in fury, but most in silence, the silence that comes with change. He made his way back down to Rye. She stood slowly when she saw him, her armor cracked and her face marked by exhaustion, but her eyes still burning. You stayed, she said. You believed, he answered. She extended her hand. He took it. As the tower's light reached its peak, casting a glow across the battlefield, Mason and Rye walked together out onto the balcony. The sky was no longer just full of threats. It was full of witnesses. The war wasn't over. But the lies that fueled it had been shattered, and somewhere far beyond the clouds, for the first time in generations, hope stirred.